How can we redefine what self-care looks like? Can it be, I did better today than I did yesterday?
When you think of the term self-care, what comes to mind? Is it spending an hour in a warm bath surrounded by candles? Is it hitting the gym after work? Or maybe it's treating yourself to a nice meal out. While these are all definitely methods of self-care, they aren't always accessible to people experiencing domestic violence. So how can someone that is enduring abuse take care of themselves? This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today we're speaking with
Maria Lagattuta, and I'm the director at the Morris Family Justice Center.
Maria works with people experiencing abuse every single day, and she has witnessed their struggle to meet the societal standards for self-care. Right now in society, what would you say is the traditional definition of self-care?
Take me away. Or like, going to the spa for a
Mhm.
spa day. I think that's the messaging that we see on social media.
Oh, 100%. I feel like everything on social media, it's like luxurious massages or like quick trips to the tropics or like a raw food diet. And, I wonder if that messaging makes it difficult for people who are experiencing abuse to feel like they have access to self-care. What do you think?
I agree. I also think kind of related to that is that when someone is feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, this idea of self care is one more task.
Mhm.
How do I have the time when I'm, worried about my children, when I'm worried about, do I have a job? Do I have a place to live?
Mhm.
Now I have to do self care, and there's one more task. And how do I fit that in?
Right. It's a lot of mental overload, I feel, for people. And how would they fit that in?
How can we redefine what self care looks like? Can it be
Yeah.
that I'm drinking my water today?
Mhm.
Can it be that maybe I go to bed a half hour early because I'm just tired?
Right.
What if we reframe the messaging around self care to be those things?
Yeah, and I do think people that have experienced abuse or currently experiencing abuse, a lot of times their thoughts are kind of externally focused. It's thinking about, can I meet the needs of the person that's using abuse? Am I being super hypersensitive to their needs and what's changing with them? And if I can do this or if I can't do this. So I do feel it's almost alien concept to really think, wait, maybe I should be assessing what my needs are. Like, how do I look into what I need? And that might be very challenging.
Even just hearing that, how many people get the messaging around taking care of yourself is selfish. So
Mhm.
if I'm externally focused on my partner who's causing harm in our
Right.
relationship, if I take care of myself, then I'm being selfish. And even for people who aren't experiencing abuse,
Mhm.
there's still that messaging around, what does selfish mean? What does my family of origin say selfish is?
Right.
And now we're asking people, oh, take care of yourself. Oh, drink enough
Mhm.
water. Oh,
Mhm.
and how is that so foreign and so against the messaging that they've received? That if I take care of myself, if I set a boundary,
Mhm.
that's selfish.
Right. What do you say in response to people who are like, I can't do that. That's selfish of me. I can't think of myself. I have to be thinking of my kids. Or how do you kind of convey that there isn't a selfishness associated with self care?
I let them know, like, if you're burnt out, what can you give?
Hmm.
What do you have available to give? And there's an old picture of a cup that's empty that says
Hmm.
you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
So if I'm with someone in person, I will Google that. I should probably save the image on my computer. But I'll Google the image, and it's just a bowl that's empty, and it says you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mhm.
So when I'm able to reframe that self care about just taking care of yourself, because if you don't have it to give because you haven't poured into yourself anything, how can you give it to someone else if you just don't have it to give?
Mhm. I also wonder if a part of the power and control um, imbalance there is also making somebody never really think of themselves. So I wonder if that also keeps people in these abusive relationships a little bit longer.
I think when you look at it from that perspective, there's so much more that's nuanced because they are not thinking about themselves in terms of what's helpful for them.
Mhm.
They're thinking, can I afford to move out?
Mhm.
Again, if we go to family of origin messaging, a lot of people make a vow for better or for worse.
Right?
So if this is the worst, it has to get better. And I made a promise to this person.
Mhm.
So I'm going to put myself aside because I made this promise to my person.
Right.
Or if there is, we're walking on eggshells all the time.
Mhm.
We don't want that explosive situation. And it can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be emotional. Um, I'm using so much energy
Right.
to keep things copacetic.
Mhm.
Where do I find the energy to take care of myself? Where do I find the energy to turn it around and look at, maybe I do need to go get a glass of water. Maybe I do need to take a nap.
I also think talking about this in general, you want to be careful to not make people feel ashamed or bad that they're not engaging in these self care practices, because I think a lot of the times it is objectively difficult or challenging because of living in like an abusive relationship. Some people think that self care is unrealistic for survivors of abuse. What would you say to somebody that might be offended even at the suggestion of doing something else for themselves? Because I think obviously you want to make the distinction that it's not like you're doing something wrong here by not doing it.
The therapist in me, not the director in me, the therapist in me, when I'm in a therapy session with any human,
Mhm.
we spend a lot of time talking about shame and where does shame come from and why does it exist. So if we go back to messaging, whether it's family of origin messaging, whether it's our partner's messaging, there's that messaging that
Right.
you're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything. And how does that shame
Mhm.
exist? I have a woman I'm working with in private practice who is in a very emotionally abusive relationship.
Mhm.
And she has chosen to stay, and that's fine. We do lots of safety planning. And we've spent a lot of time talking about if she does something for herself, what is the shame around that?
Mm.
She just finished her bachelor's program. And I praised her. I was like, oh my gosh, you did that. You have, your kids, your family, your work, your this. And she's like, no, it was no big deal. And we talked about that because she didn't feel like she deserved praise. So how do we process through that? No, you do deserve this. And so sometimes it is therapy, sometimes it is being surrounded by people who can challenge that thought.
Right.
Um,
MC from the future here. Maria emailed me after we were done with our conversation and wanted me to mention that her client is setting healthier boundaries, feels more comfortable and confident in her choices and decisions now. Okay, back to the past. Yeah, and I actually was thinking about this and like preparing for our conversation is I'm wondering if perceptions of self-worth, which could be damaged by somebody that's enduring abuse, impact their ability to perceive that they have a right even to self-care. Because I would imagine that it's very difficult then to think about yourself if yourself has been like degraded so strongly.
and so many people don't believe that they are worth anything more than what they're receiving.
Mm,
So now if I'm saying, hey, it's okay to drink a glass of water, it's okay to take a nap, it's okay to go to bed a half hour early.
right?
Well, no, I have to do this, I have to do that, because I think it is the perception of the more I do, the more I will be accepted.
What do you mean by that?
Sounds so smart in my head.
No, it does.
That that if I can do these things for my person, they will accept me. If
Ah,
I am that perfect person,
mm,
I will be accepted. But if I am less than, because obviously I must be less than, and I
right.
will never be good enough,
Mm.
I will keep doing more and more and more to prove my worthiness.
Wow. That is such an interesting piece of this that I think is designed to keep people trapped in those kinds of relationships, right?
Yeah.
I also wonder, in talking about some of the self-care practices, you have, let's say, people go to the gym, people get, like we talked about, get a massage or buy essential oils, yoga class. And I'm wondering also, considering certain abusive dynamics, if they're being controlled or their actions are being monitored, they can't just engage in some of these activities as freely. What are some challenges, even just in being in an abusive relationship, in accessing certain self care practices like those ones we went through?
Well, I think, the financial piece is so difficult.
Hmm.
I always encourage people, I'm like, YouTube has a ton of free stuff. You can do 10-minute yoga, beginner yoga, stretching, meditation, whatever. I encourage people to use YouTube. Go outside for a walk. If they have pets, if they have kids, go for a walk. There's so much research on, I think they call it nature therapy, where just being out in green areas just really help people feel better. And there's so much research on how being out in nature can be very healing.
Absolutely.
So, and listen, most people, even if you have a pair of flip flops, you can go
Yeah.
for a walk or a
Yeah.
pair of shoes, and just to get out.
Yeah. I mean, just personally, I feel the benefits all the time in the summer because of how much more time I spend outdoors. I feel it makes just a massive difference to just get out and into the sun. And there's like a bunch of different podcasts I've been listening to where they weren't specifically about people experiencing abuse, but it was people in general going outside, being in the sun. It just kind of activates something in your body that like releases different hormones. Maybe even if you can't get outside, sitting near an open window or something like that. As we talked a little bit about all these different challenges that a person experiencing abuse might have with accessing self care, what are other little acts of self care that they could engage in? What might self care look like for people that are experiencing abuse?
I think it could be something as simple as being kind to themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, if they're talking so negatively to themselves, and I know it's hard, but how would you talk to a child? How would you talk to your best friend?
Hmm.
Why are you talking to yourself like that?
Right.
I challenge a lot of people on you don't always need to apologize.
Mm.
And I find with people who have experienced a lot of abuse, they are apologizing for everything, even though they shouldn't.
Right?
I think they shouldn't. Let me
Right.
but I tell people be compassionate to yourself. This is hard what you're doing. For the people that we work with who have come for help,
Mhm.
most people come in fear, and I tell them, nope, you're courageous. And they're like, no, I'm not.
Wow.
And there's been research on how fear and courage live right next to each other. Because for you to do something that is scary, you have to have a little bit of courage.
Yes,
They live
absolutely.
right there. The example I use when I'm in private practice is that, do you think of firefighters like, woohoo, this is so exciting, I'm going into a burning building, or is there a little bit of fear?
Right.
Right. But we look at them like, oh, they're so courageous, they're heroes. But I do believe that there has to be fear next to the courage, because you can't do that thing that's courageous if fear doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think they go, as you said, hand in hand. Anything that requires courage usually has fear or something else that motivates it. And yeah, I mean, that's amazing that you say that to people because I mean that I couldn't think of something more courageous, than being able to come and ask for help in a situation like that. I'm curious, have you encountered skepticism in general? Maybe they don't believe you that something so small as going into the sun could help, or having an extra glass of water, or sleeping a little bit earlier. Have you encountered any of that skepticism? And like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think lots of people, how can I trust you?
Mm.
Right? I don't know you. How do I trust that having an extra glass of water? Usually what I'll do is I'll ask, try it anyway. And if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. I usually also, if it's someone who's truly skeptical, I'll try to find the research to show them where some of this is said, because then it gives a little bit more backing to just like, who's Maria to say, hey, drink an extra glass of water.
Right.
Um, so I'll try to back it up with some research. But again, I tell this to people all the time. I will not tell you what to do. That is
Mhm.
not my job. I can encourage things,
Right.
But if you try it and it works for you, then keep doing it. If it doesn't work, then let's find something else that works. And I think that that's what's so tough, is because I think people think that self-care is cookie cutter, that
Yes.
any type of this stuff is cookie cutter, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So we're breathing, doing box breathing. Here's my toy, my breath toy. We breathe in,
Hmm.
hold it, and then breathe out. Breathing might not work for some people. Grounding techniques may not work for some people, where, like, what does the chair feel like underneath me? What's the temperature of the room? Those may not work, but that may work for a lot of people.
Right.
But I know plenty of people who tell me breathing doesn't work for me. Okay, let's try something else.
I'm one of those people.
Give you my toy.
No, but I do think you make an excellent point, which is that the people that are experiencing these situations are the experts in their own experiences also of what calms them down. And I think there's a lot of power in you not telling people exactly how they must act in order to achieve some sort of peace, because, in abusive dynamics, a lot of times people are being told what to do all the time. So is there some sort of like empowerment even there in choosing stuff that makes them feel better? Or what do you think?
Yes. And I think that's why a lot of people come to us, just what you said. They have been told what to do, they have been
Mm,
told what not to do. And I think, like, when we give people who are surviving abusive relationships choices, that is so hard. It doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel
same.
comfortable.
Mhm.
I have one person that we're working with, just tell me what to do. Tell me what I should do. And I'm like, nope, that is not my job. But this person has been told what to do.
Mhm.
So then it is going back to, well, try this or this. We want them to have choices, but maybe not too many choices. So
Yeah.
this or this might work. So instead of giving them 10 choices, let's give them two. And then, oh wow, this choice did work out okay. Now maybe, right. So we're building it. It's baby steps.
So it's like gradual choice instead of saying like, here's 1,000 things, figure it out. Yeah, because that, I mean, especially if you're in a trauma state, I would imagine having to even consider all of the different possibilities is overwhelming and could cause stress, especially if you're used to just being like, tell me like the path to follow. Wow, that's a really interesting component of just self-care in general and wellness. So you talked a little bit about this, but for somebody that is experiencing abuse, in your experience, if they have engaged in some of these self-care practices, what have you seen is the benefit, or what have they said is the benefit to them, even if they remain in that abusive situation?
I think they do feel more empowered. My experience has been people feel more grounded. And again, that they have choices to make, where in the past, I don't think people have always felt they have choices. And then when I feel better, I have more energy.
Mhm.
So if you're thinking of someone in a super depressed state, they may not have the energy. Someone who's being incredibly controlled, they may not have the energy. Now,
Yeah.
maybe I got a little bit of extra sunlight today and wow, I feel better. Maybe, maybe I can go for that walk for 10 minutes. And again, I always tell people, start out small, 5, 10 minutes. Those YouTube videos, 10 minutes taps. If you're going to start doing yoga, you can't start it at an hour a day. Start with 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Right. So would you recommend people just search like like beginners yoga, or like what would they search on YouTube?
I usually encourage people to find like 10-minute stretching, or like 10-minute beginner yoga. And what comes up is a lot of 5 and 10 minute stuff for beginners.
Mhm.
Um, that's stretching. There's guided meditation. I know meditation is so hard for people.
Right.
It's hard for me, but you can find like 4 or 5 minute guided meditation. So you're having a view of something. So are you walking down the ocean? Are you walking through the woods and a deer is coming out to look at you? And
Honestly, I love guided meditations. There's ones in the snow where you can like almost hear like the crunching of the snow, and they're describing like it's just so relaxing. I'm not great at meditating because it's a lot of breathing, but there's something about guided imagery that I'm like, yes, I love this. So
I think it's an easy way to start. And
totally.
again, that's self-care. And it's
Mhm.
only 5 minutes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel people might think, "Oh, it's only 5 minutes, like, I'm not really doing anything for myself." But what does it really mean to kind of carve out that time to do a designated practice for yourself every day?
Well, hopefully it feels good. That's our
True.
goal. But hopefully it also releases some of the negative that we're holding on to, because people hold on to a lot of negative energy. And if I
Yeah.
got 5 minutes where maybe I feel a little bit lighter or my shoulders aren't living in my ears,
Mhm.
or and a lot of people have somatic stuff around digestion and belly stuff. Oh wow, my stomach isn't twirling right now. And a lot of times I think if people can recognize, where does that come from? Right. When I'm doing work with clients, I talk about, how do we scale it? Like, think about the pain scale at the hospital, 0 to 10. We don't want your pain to be at 10.
Right.
We really don't, because it takes a lot longer. So for our humans, if they're at a 5 or a 6 where they're feeling the depression, the anxiety, maybe it's taking 3 minutes to
Mhm.
do a quick guided meditation or 3 minutes of breathing. And now I can ground myself again. Now I can feel present. Because I think a lot of times when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're at a 10. You're not able to think. My mind is messy. There's so much stuff, because I'm thinking about, okay, what do I have to do to keep my person calm?
Right, right.
What do I have to do for my kids because they have whatever they have going on? And if I don't do that, then my person's going to get upset with me.
That hypervigilance.
Thank you. Thank you for the right language.
No, I mean, what would you say, and this might sound like a really simple, reductive question here, but what would you say to somebody that asks, okay, and what's the benefit of bringing myself down from a 7 to a 5? What is the benefit of settling my stomach, of, doing these practices that take care of myself in the moment?
Because then my smart thinking brain, my prefrontal cortex can go back online.
Mm,
There's some great videos about how our brain can function, and that our animal brain, the part with emotion, is down here by our brainstem, and that it takes over. Our lizard brain, it takes over,
yeah.
and we can't think, we can't process things. But if we breathe, if we meditate, then hopefully the animal brain goes back down and our prefrontal cortex can come back online, and we can think and feel more present. Because if I'm worrying about what's going to happen next week, next year, in 10 minutes, I can't do the other stuff. They talk about depression is about past focused and anxiety is future focused.
Right.
So when you find yourself worrying about like what happened that you can't change a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, a year ago,
Mhm.
or you're worried about future stuff, what's going on right now? What do you need to do right now? And some of that will bring us back to the present. So our prefrontal cortex goes back online. And that now, like I like to call it, our smart thinking brain goes back online, and we can think.
And what's the benefit of thinking?
Now I can make choices that
Right.
are healthy for me, for my
Mhm.
family. If I'm taking care of myself, I can give to my family differently than if I am burnt crispy cookie.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a radical idea for some people to really be able to not focus on the past, especially in an abusive dynamic. It's very difficult when you're in those dynamics to take a beat for yourself. You're constantly like, "Oh my god, like I used their glass, like I shouldn't have done that, or did I put this back, or where am I going to go? Like are they upset? Like whatever." And to take a moment to like really be still is incredibly challenging.
People are still going to, I could have, should have, would have.
Yes.
What if? But how do we give ourselves grace that we made different choices?
Mhm.
Yes, I'm still maybe ruminating a little bit.
Mhm.
I'm a human being. Maybe that's part of self care.
Yeah.
I'm human and I make mistakes. And I
Mhm.
don't know why I'm getting emotional,
That's okay,
but
because 'cause you're human.
but I think we don't do that. What does our social media, what does the media show us? Like, there's this perfection, right? Even when you think about like our people who use substances, right? It's okay for them to relapse.
Right.
It's part of healing for us. If we are ruminating on the past, how do we give ourselves grace that, okay, but I'm not spending an hour there, I'm spending 45 seconds there.
Mm.
And how do I give myself that grace?
Totally. You know, Maria, I love what you have to say about this because I was thinking you were going to say more stuff and this is important, but like drink some water, different little things that people could do. But what you're saying is even beyond that and it's the intangible, which is you could start to think a little differently. Instead of worrying for an hour, you're going to worry for 45 minutes. And it doesn't have to be such a massive shift and change. And I think that is a lot more manageable than a complete, like, well, you're going to go on a yoga retreat and leave for a month and then come back, you know? I never thought of self-care in those terms of just like giving yourself grace and what a powerful that's really powerful. So thank you just for sharing that in general. I feel like people that hear this conversation, if they want to start the process of self-care, maybe they have really no idea of what they might need, learning how to maybe take a step back and reflect on what their needs are. What would you suggest? It's a loaded question.
It really is. I have no book answer for you. I think it's being kind to yourself. Like, if your goal, like, let's just use water because I got my water here. Let's say your goal is to drink 50 ounces of water a day
Mhm.
and you're going from nothing to 50. Okay, so maybe I drank 25 ounces of water. Now we're in a different place than we were. How do we accept that those baby steps are okay?
Mhm.
It's it really goes back to just be compassionate for the new thing you did. It doesn't need I love your example of going on a month-long yoga retreat. I mean, and we're talking about self-care and financial abuse. I don't know who
Right.
can do that. But I think it's those small things where I did better today than I did yesterday. You remember the old saying, practice makes perfect. And there's been a shift in practice makes progress.
Mm.
So how we look at like, what does practice make perfect or practice makes progress mean? If we get out of our mind frame of it's not Pinterest perfect, it never will be. But if we work towards something, we will be hopefully we'll be better than we were yesterday. And if we have a relapse, whatever that relapse definition may be, it's okay because now we have more information.
Right. Did you
Now
say
we have,
Pinterest perfect?
I did.
That is such a good phrase. I'm obsessed with that. That is so good. But you're right. I mean, think of how everything is curated on Pinterest. Think of how everything is extra. I don't know if you've ever seen these videos of people doing ice restock videos where they're like doing all these elaborate different like methods of restocking ice in all these different forms and flavors and yeah, but I feel we have moved towards a society towards what you're talking about of these over the top expressions of self-care that are highly curated and maybe arguably not even that beneficial for the person that's experiencing it.
Yeah. So really, I guess my definition of self-care is just be kind to yourself.
Mhm.
Drink your water. Yes, it's important. Go for a walk. And if you don't do it today, because of whatever is going on, give yourself a little bit of grace because you would give your best friend, you would give your kid that grace.
And just moving a little or making that progress is better than not trying at all or not even not trying. I don't want to say that because that also implies that somebody's not giving enough effort.
And I think it's tough when people are really super depressed and it looks like they're not trying.
Right.
Them getting up and taking a shower is all they can do. And
Yes.
how is that enough? So maybe that's the other piece of what you can do, especially depending on where you are, is enough. The fact that I got out of bed and I took a shower this morning,
Right.
that's enough today. I did
Yes.
it. I accomplished something.
And your scale isn't somebody else's scale. So, like, if people are, like you said, too depressed to get out of bed, you can sit up in bed or you can just change your shirt or something. And I think really diluting it, like making it very simple and realizing that your journey isn't anyone else's journey and you can decide what progress is for you. That is in and of itself, I think is such an eye-opening idea. You're told, oh, go sit in the sun. Well, if you can't make it outside, open a window and kind of just try and find what it is that you can do. without that shame of like, oh my God, I said that I was going to drink water and I didn't, like you said. But you know what? I thought about it. And at least, you know what? I'll try again tomorrow, and not getting hung up on, oh God, I'm the worst person ever. I'm not taking care of myself. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of anybody else. And really reducing, I feel, that shame, I think, is also so powerful, because in self-care, as you're saying, it's just kindness to yourself. And there's no real room for shame in that, no matter what.
Yeah, definitely reframe what does selfish mean. I think it's so hard because again, family of origin messaging, partner messaging, Pinterest messaging. So yeah, I have no great words of wisdom except be kind and give yourself grace when it's not perfect. It's not going to be. We're human.
And that is wise, just so you know. Before we end this conversation, is there anything else about self-care, and how it intersects with domestic abuse that you would like to cover that I didn't already ask about or expand upon?
If we can start to reframe what self-care looks like, and that it doesn't need to be this, expensive spa stuff, and that someone who is experiencing the abuse is still a worthy human being, because I think a lot of times they don't think they are, that they're still worthy of kindness and respect. And maybe it needs to start with themselves. And how does that look? Because it's going to look different than they're probably used to.
Do you think practicing self-care could start to make them feel more worthy, or take a little bit of that worthlessness away in some capacity?
Yes. And I think a lot of it is also just kind of reframing those thoughts. Sometimes saying I'm worthy of something is hard to believe,
Right.
but we want to connect this brain to our hearts. And if it doesn't feel connected right now, that's okay. But I'm going to keep saying this and start to see like my deserve level change. I deserve this. I deserve that. And it's okay. It may not happen the first time you say, oh, I am a worthy human being. I am enough as I am, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to happen the first time.
Right.
Going back to the toddler, they maybe take one step and then they fall down.
Mhm.
And then the next day they take two steps, they fall
Mhm.
down. It's a process. And then a year from when they start walking, they're running around and you can't catch up with them. So maybe that's us.
Maria, speaking with you about self-care was so inspiring to me. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that self-care is really what we make it. It doesn't have to ascribe to any traditional notion of wellness. If you listen to this episode and are looking for coping strategies and grounding techniques to start your own journey of self-care, you can find them on jbws.org/resources. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible,